Hello and welcome to another Budget Model Railways video. In today's video we're going to be looking at the beginner toolkit, which is what I believe is everything you would need to start a model railway tools wise in a small kit for a beginner on a budget. So let's have a look inside at all the different tools. So first of all, the most important thing in a toolkit is of course the actual box. So this toolkit is rather nice because it has a main compartment in the bottom here, separated with a little tray that goes on top with a few different smaller compartments in there to separate your smaller items like paintbrushes and pencils from your bigger items like clamps and saws. So when looking for a toolbox, try and find one that has different compartments and containers for different pieces. So first of all, let's look at the smaller items I have in the tray here. So starting from the beginning in no particular order, just how I picked them out of here. A craft knife, always very useful for cutting cardboard. You've seen us use this in hundreds of videos. This specific one is from Poundland, or I guess in America the dollar store. So in Poundland you can get a pack of 6 of these for £1, so that makes this ridiculously cheap. A Pritt Stick is always useful for gluing together card buildings. For example, putting brick paper onto cereal packet card, which we do quite frequently. Sometimes if you use PVA glue, it will run the colour in the brick card, so that's why we use a Pritt Stick. Now this is again a cheap brand from Poundland. You could use a more expensive glue stick if you wanted to, but you get a pack of these, a pack of 5 of these for £1, so that makes it 20p. Obviously PVA glue is very useful for gluing together the card buildings once you've put brick paper on them. It's also very useful for gluing pretty much everything on your layout. It will glue down ballast when you mix it with water. It will glue down roofing felt or ballast mat, which is what we use it for most of the time, and it will just touch things up and fix them up. So it's a very useful thing to have in a beginner toolkit. Now we buy our PVA glue from Screwfix. We buy 10 litres or 5 litres, something like that at a time. Buy it in bulk from Screwfix because you get it trade price, which is obviously cheaper. And then what we do is we have these cheap bottles we got off eBay from China with a nice little lid and more of a directional nozzle so that you can get a nice stream out of it. So that's what we put glue in. Continuing on with the glue thing. This is plastic glue, and this is very useful for gluing together, for example, our 3D printed kits that we sell. This can glue only plastic, but generally most types of plastic, so it's great if you're gluing together Daypol kits, Airfix kits, things like that. Fixing up bits of locos, because generally their bodies are made out of plastic. And sometimes it can also be used as a sort of super glue. It doesn't dry very quickly, but it does sort of work with a lot of things. Continuing on, a pencil and a pencil sharpener. Now this is very useful for marking things out, which again you've seen us do a lot. So get a pencil, nice decent one, and a sharpener to make sure it stays nice and sharp, because the sharper the pencil is, the neater your marks are. You can pick pencils up for like 50 for £1 and pencil sharpeners for like 20p. So that's nice and cheap. When marking things out as well, a ruler is also useful. Now in this toolkit, for example, it's not quite long enough to toolbox, isn't quite long enough to have a 1 foot ruler in, but you can pick up these 15cm rulers. Now what I'd say is quite important is don't buy a plastic ruler. Go into somewhere like Wickes, or I know our local sort of, I don't know how to explain it, it's like a pet shop, ESK, the people in UK will know what that means. Sell these, it's an Amtech one, sell these for about £1, 15cm steel rule. Now I'd say it's quite important you get a steel rule, because at the edge here you can see one, do it the right way up for you, one finishes at the end. So it's not like a standard ruler where there's a bit of plastic on the end. So what that means is you can put this up against things, up against corners, and you can see exactly how long they are. Now, because it's made out of steel, it's also useful for laying down on a piece of card like that, and then getting your knife and running along the edge to cut a nice straight line. Because if you use a plastic ruler, you'll probably cut the plastic ruler. whereas if you use a steel rule, can't cut it. As well, with the marking out, a pen, always useful. It's just one of our pens. Pens you can get from everywhere for all sorts of prices, so don't need to explain that too much. Paintbrushes. These are always useful for painting things, obviously, but they're also useful for doing things like dry brushing and weathering to logos and buildings and just your general layout. And I'd say this brush right here, if you're going to do ballasting with proper ballast, unlike our usual methods, it is great for just going in between the tracks and gently doing that to get the ballast out. So a set of paintbrushes from big to small is always useful. Phillips head screwdriver. Now these are important for all sorts of things. Just in a general basic toolkit you should have a Phillips head screwdriver, because screws, all sorts of things, taking apart locos, they generally are attached together with Phillips head screwdrivers, so that's why that would be important. We also have a flathead screwdriver, again because it's important. Now a flathead screwdriver also undoes connector blocks. Now the reason we have these in the basic toolkit is so that we don't have to have a soldering iron. So what these do is basically take away the need for a soldering iron. So instead of having to get a wire and another wire and soldering them together to join them, you can use a connector block. You just cut off however many you need, feed a wire in there, feed a wire in there, and use the flathead screwdriver to screw down the screws, and it basically joins the wires perfectly fine. I mean, a lot of our layouts, most of them, actually use connector blocks rather than bothering with soldering, because the useful thing about these is if you want to connect a controller to your track, but you don't want the controller to permanently be for that layout, so you want to take it off and use it on another layout, you can just unscrew a set of screws, take the controller off, screw it onto another layout. So that's always very useful. And the final thing in this tray are track fixing pins. Now obviously these are very useful for putting down your track. They're also basically small little tacks, so they can be used for all sorts of things to do with tacking. So you could tack together cardboard buildings, don't know why you'd want to, but you could. But mainly for tracking track down, and they're just a useful thing to have in your toolkit. So that's the small tray done. Now we'll move on to what's in the main compartment of the toolbox. Okay, so now let's take a look at the main compartment of what's in the toolbox. So again, in no particular order, I'm just going to pick from the top and work my way down. Here's what's in the main compartment. So first of all, masking tape, and this is very useful for a lot of things. For example, if you're gluing together cardboard with PVA glue, it needs to be held for a while, so you could tape round edges to keep it together temporarily while the glue dries, which takes around 24 hours. So masking tape, very useful. You can pick that up so cheap at Poundland, I don't know, multiple rolls for £1. As well, for keeping things together, what's always handy are some of these, let's get the other one out here, some of these clamps here. Now they're quite good, they're like washing pegs, they're just little alligator clippy things. Now I have a couple of small ones in here and a couple of quite big ones in here as well, because a few different sizes is useful. Next I have a hacksaw. Now this is very useful in a beginner toolkit because it's not a full-size saw, you don't really need one for doing model railways. It's just a smaller saw for cutting things like track if you need to, but as a beginner I'd recommend just sticking to set track. But it's useful for cutting small bits of wood, even really thick cardboard, a hacksaw can be useful for. Now I'd recommend as well, if you're going to put this in a beginner toolkit, to have a brand new blade on it, because this blade is not sharp at all. Next up, I'd say that's fairly obvious, a decent pair of scissors. Again, make sure they're kind of brand new, nice and sharp. I don't know, scissors you can get so cheap from anywhere. And the clamps I got, I think it was £1 for all of them, which is pretty good. A pair of pliers, very useful. Now ideally, you want a pair of pliers with some wire cutters in them that can also be used to strip wires as well, because you need to have wires stripped if you're going to use them in connector blocks. So the pair of pliers is good for cutting wires, stripping wires, doing things like track pins. If you want to get them out, you can get the head of the pliers in the track and pull out like that. So a small, decent pair of pliers, definitely a good idea. You can pick them up very cheap. Now, if you don't have a pair of pliers with a wire cutter on them, like them wire cutters aren't very good, I have here a decent set of wire cutters. which actually came with the 3D printer, but they're nice. They look cheap enough. I'd imagine you could pick these up for £1 in some cheap store. These are great because they have a nice sharp blade. You can use them for cutting wires and stripping wires. As well, I'd recommend a small hammer like this. Now, you don't want the traditional sort of hammer with the two teeth coming out to leather out screws. What you want is something like this hammer, which has a hard end, that end, and this would be used for whacking in track pins until you get too close, and then you can use this end. You can see here how it goes to a nice point for getting the track pins accurately without bashing the track. Now, it's also useful if you want to do some precision hammering, because you can get close and hammer exactly where you want to. As well, I'd recommend a decent metal file. This one is very old, but it does its job. Stainless steel. You can pick these up for, I'd imagine you could get them for a couple of quid online somewhere. Now, ideally what you want is a good metal file rather than your cheap emery boards, because these are great for filing down, for example, 3D printed kits if there's any spurs on them, which there occasionally is, and it's also good simply for just filing things down like a file should do. Now, this one has a flat file piece here and also a rounded curve here, which is great if you want to file in some arches. Now, as well, with the sanding, what I'd recommend is a sanding block here. You can pick these up from Poundland for a couple for £1, and probably more than that. So it's basically a block of foam, like a sponge, coated in abrasive paper. This is great for cleaning track, especially the old steel track, not necessarily modern nickel silver, but second-hand steel track, because it's nice and abrasive. You can do that along the whole way, clean a couple of tracks at once and get all the old muck off. If you want to be precise again, you can use the narrower edge and work along like that. The last thing I have in the toolbox here is this A5 cutting mat. You can see here I'm on a very big cutting mat. This one is, I don't know, it's in inches. This one's a couple of meters long, but this is just a nice small cutting mat here. Now, this is great for if you're at home, you're not really, you're kind of just starting out in the hobby, and it's very useful for if you are going to be, just get some tools out of the tray, if you are going to be cutting along something, because you do not want to cut into your table or anything like that, or into a tablecloth, because you probably want them. So it's great. This is an A5 size one. You can get A4s, 3s, up to huge ones like this one. This specific one I think cost £2, or it might have cost £1. Again, it's an Amtech, like the ruler, and this one we got from ESK. So it's 20 centimeters by 15 centimeters, which is all you really need for starting out. So that's everything in the main compartment now. So now I'm just going to do a quick overview and sum up the video. So that was the video on a beginner toolkit and what I'd put in it. If you have any ideas of what more you would like videos on this type on, so for example, I don't know, how to use the tools, I don't know, leave your suggestions down in the comments. So this is a fairly budget beginner toolkit for all the people who are just starting out in the hobby, not necessarily model railways, but this has been specifically designed, this kit, for model railways. But just in general, this is a basic beginner toolbox. I'd say everything here, including the box, you could probably get everything in here for no more than £20, which makes it a nice budget kit for starting out in any hobby that needs a toolbox. So thanks for watching, and leave your suggestions down in the comments for what video you would like me to do on next.
Hi, thanks for watching the video and for the nice comments. Click on the left for a previous video in this series, click on the right for another video you might enjoy, and please don't forget to click to subscribe, like, comment, etc. Thanks again.